the people who wouldn't go home wouldn't stay quiet. Reverend Jackson, the people followed. Yeah. Example.
Don't forget about the witness. Donna Williams.
Donna Williams. Donna supposed to be here. Donna.
Yeah.
So, we love you, Donna. Without further ado, my brother, Attorney Chris Stewart. And Tony, you coming up next.
We all right. We got Steve on.
The first. Steve Harvey suit saying full effect. The first thing that.
What's happening? Pardon My Presence YouTube channel. I'm just making this video off the heels of the guilty verdict for Derek Chauvin. Now, I'm going to be honest with you right here, and some people might not like my take, but listen, I was watching the news and I was seeing a lot of people celebrating, people were cheering, people were relieved, people were crying. It almost felt like the OJ trial when OJ was found not guilty. Again, this is my personal story. I remember I was in high school when that occurred, and when we heard that not guilty verdict, we all ran into the hallways. We were banging on the lockers. We were celebrating. We were happy because we understood the mountain of evidence that OJ had to deal with and his defense attorneys. We also understood the overwhelming odds against OJ as far as him being a black man, a black athlete, being accused of killing a white girlfriend or ex-wife and another white man. So we understood the gravity of the situation, and we understood that it looked like they had him dead to rights. So for him to be let go, for him to be found not guilty, it was a big deal. It was a sign of, hey, look, here's a black man who had enough money, enough resources to beat the system at its own game. And that's why we cheered. At least that's why I cheered. And a lot of my friends too during that time. But this is a little bit different because here you have a case of a black man who was accused of giving counterfeit bills. Police came in to question him. For some reason, he became erratic. Police decided to put him into the police cruiser. That didn't work. They took him out, decided to lay him on his stomach and put their knee in his neck, his knee in his head, his knee all over his body. He's begging for help. He's begging, saying he can't breathe. They don't respond to his pleas. And they just stood there, or kneeled there, like Colin Kaepernick kneeled on the field, the football field. They kneeled on his neck for 8 minutes and 44 seconds. Whatever time that it was, close to 9 minutes. But the point is, they did that with the crowd pleading to listen to the man's pleas. To everybody else pleading to listen to the man's pleas. Even to the first responders, the EMS workers or whoever, the paramedics, when they came in, they had to tap not George Floyd, they had to tap Derek Chauvin on his shoulder to say, hey, we're here now, you could get off of him, and we could take him in. So we saw all of that. So, with knowing all those things going on, and what transpired, and knowing the history when it comes to trials involving police officers against a black man or a black victim, which always seems to be the victim that's put on trial. And we saw what happened with the Amy Geiger case, where she killed Botham Jean in his own apartment, and how she was found guilty. And people cheered as well then too. But they always cheer prematurely, because they never wait for the sentencing. Now, in this case, the sentencing stage is in 8 weeks. So while I see Benjamin Crump, Al Sharpton, poor old Jesse Jackson in the background, playing third string, all celebrating, everyone's cheering and everyone's clapping. There's still George Floyd in the casket, in the ground. And he will never rise up like Jesus Christ on the third day. He will remain dead and gone. He will remain in the ground, and he will never come back. So for all the people cheering and all the people who are happy and people are crying in tears of joy, understand, what does this change? Because just 2 weeks ago, we just saw Daunte Wright get killed. We just saw him get killed by a police officer over foolishness. And we're going to see it again as well, too. We can almost guarantee it. We already know it. We've been conditioned to expect it. But yet, why are we celebrating this? This is far from over. And the worst thing about this, again, I'm speaking off the fly here, off the cuff here. But the worst thing about this is the fact that you have a lawyer like Benjamin Crump, and then you have a lawyer like Lee Merritt, who are playing this role as a spokesperson or an activist or a preacher or the PR person for black people speaking to the media, when what they really should be doing is taking their expertise, if they claim that they have expertise when it comes to legalese and everything else of those matters, using their expertise, using their skill sets to draft some type of legislation to present to Congress, to the House, to Senate, to get laws put in place, to change laws, to update the legislation so that these things cannot happen again. And if they do, there are stricter laws in place so that these police officers are not protected by the union. They don't have qualified immunity, and they are treated just like any other individual who screws up royally on their job and murders someone. That should be the fight. And I don't see any indication of any of those people that were cheering and celebrating on that panel during that press conference. I don't see any of them saying, this is just one small victory, but there's more to do. There's legislation that needs to be passed. There's laws that need to be changed. Not defund the police, because it's not about money. This is about changing the laws and legislation, making sure that police know that they will be held accountable and they will not be protected by their union if they do something that is grossly considered to be misconduct, that is a costly error where someone loses their life unnecessarily. These are the things that we should be fighting for to put in place. Otherwise, we're going to have more George Floyds. We're going to have more Daunte Wrights. So that should be the focus. And one more thing I want to address. I was watching this young woman's channel, and she decided to do a short about the Chauvin verdict, and she came to tears. And what she was saying was she was thanking her Lord. She was thanking God in regards to this particular wing and how it was a long time coming and black people deserve this. And she also mentioned that she has a 12-year-old boy and she's in fear of his life because sometimes when he has to run for the bus, he cuts through houses, he's wearing a hoodie, and she doesn't know what's going to happen to him. He could be killed. Her neighbor might call the police, or he might get shot. All these different things that she was saying. So I want to address this. I think this is very, very important that people need to understand. There's a responsibility of the government, because they're the ones who control the police, who create the legislation. then there's also responsibility for the citizens. And in this particular case, black people need to understand something. I'll tell you this. In the case of Trayvon Martin, they didn't know who Trayvon Martin was walking in that area. And that area is supposed to be like a gated community. I don't know if it's a gated community, but it's a closely knit area. And it's the area where apparently Zimmerman was patrolling. He didn't recognize him. And the father lived there with his new girlfriend. Right? Trayvon Martin's father lived there with his new girlfriend. So no one knows who Trayvon Martin is because he lived with his mother on the other side of town. And this happens quite often where there's a black man or a black teenager, a black boy who's in a neighborhood and no one knows who he is. They suspect him to be a robber, a drug dealer, a thief, a gang member, all these different accusations, all these different jumping to conclusions, all different scenarios where they always place the most negative outcome or result or the most negative stereotype on that black person. Now, we can never, ever control how someone feels about us. We can never control how someone behaves. This is why the whole fight against racism, it's a ridiculous fight, because you will never be able to eradicate racism. That will never happen. But what you can do is put yourself in positions of power. And this is my solution, because when it comes to these situations where you're afraid of your son being mistaken for somebody or something he's not, because a neighbor might suspect him to be somebody bad. Do you know your neighbor? Not just neighbor that's beside you. How about a neighbor across the street? How about a neighbor that's 2 houses down? The neighbor that you share the backyard with? Do you know your superintendent? Does your children know your superintendent? Are you part of the community? Do you go to community functions? Do you introduce yourself? Do you bring your kids along? Are they introducing themselves? Do your kids play with their kids? Are there any interactions? The reason why I'm pointing this out, because a lot of times, and again, this is not just black people, this is people in general, they don't want to associate with each other. They don't want to get to know your neighbors. More now than any time ever before, you have communities who are not communities. They don't know anyone, and they don't want to be involved in anything. And they don't want to pry, and they don't want to get involved in other people's businesses or business. But the problem with that is that when you don't know who your next door neighbor is, when you see a young kid running with a hoodie on, you're going to think he's a thief, instead of realizing that is your neighbor's son running for school. So it's very important as a parent, because again, it is your responsibility. Until your child becomes an adult, your child is a dependent and is under your care. You are responsible. So as a parent, instead of crying, looking for sympathy, playing the victim role, go and get involved in your community. Be on the community outreach program. Be on a neighborhood watch. Make sure your influence is there. So that way you could steer the power away from Karen or the racist person who's going to be calling police on your child. And you're going to be one who's going to say, no, you're not calling the police because that is my child. He's a good student. If you have any problems with him, that you come and see me. I live at this address. I'm part of this community. And you flex your muscle. You let them know that you have nothing to hide. Your son has nothing to hide. And you will not be intimidated. And if worse comes to worse, you will call the police on them. You pay taxes. You are not an outcast. Unless you want to become an outcast and place yourself in the corner and not participate. So my advice to anybody, especially black people, anybody who feels that they're being singled out, that they're being targeted, it's time to be proactive, and it's time to get involved in these particular communities or these particular programs, and let your voices be heard and get into positions of power where you have influence, where you have control, where you have some say. Because when you are involved in that type of environment or in that type of situation, people are going to respect you, people are going to know who you are, and they're going to extend that level of respect to your children as well too. And before they call the cops on your child if he does something wrong, he or she, your daughter or your son, they're more than likely going to come and see you and say, hey, by the way, I saw, your child do this. Please talk to him because I don't know what's going on. I don't want to call the police on him because we know each other. We know you, you're a good family, so on and so forth. Connect with people. And it's not about kissing ass. It's about building relationships, right? Building relationships so that way there's a give and take. Because at the end of the day, you want someone who's going to be calling the police when something doesn't look right at your house when you're not home. You want a nosy Karen looking around saying what's going on so you could call the police. So that nothing is stolen from your home. There's no break and enters in your home. You want something like that. But you also want to be able to put that person in check and say, hey, this is my child. If there's any issues, you come and see me. And you can't have that conversation with them if you don't know who they are, if you don't introduce yourself, if you don't have some type of civil discord with them, if you don't get to know them. And this is how you build influence. And this is how you be able to gain some power. And that's how you protect your children from being victims of police being called in for no reason, arrests being made turn into your child never coming home again. Because one thing that I saw in that panel with Benjamin Crump and all those other civil rights leaders, I didn't see any of George Floyd's family there. So while they're dancing and cheering about the victory, George Floyd's family is still grieving, still hurt, still in pain. And they still know that he's never coming back no matter what the outcome is. And that's the sad thing about all of this. So while we can all cheer and we can all celebrate, understand that someone's life was taken from us in the worst way possible, in the most agonizing way possible, then it should be never celebrated. And we should work like hell to find ways to prevent this, to find ways to be proactive about this, to find ways to make sure by law that there'll be stricter measures in place so that this never happens again. And if it does, there will be certain legal actions that's predicated in the law and by legislation, and that in itself will be a deterrent. And that's all I have to say about that particular topic. Again, I don't want to be a downer. I don't want to be a negative person. But this ain't nothing to celebrate. And we all saw what happened to Botham Jean when Amy Geiger was found guilty as well too. She didn't get many years. She only got 10. And with the 10-year sentence, she could appeal and be released, waiting on appeal. And with the 10-year sentence, she could easily get out within about 2, 3 years, 4 years on parole. And Botham Jean was not a criminal. He wasn't running from the police. No one called the police on him. He was in his own home eating ice cream. A church-going guy. A guy who got along with everybody, from different races, nationalities, creeds, walks of life, everything. So stop celebrating. Stop. And let's stay focused. Let's think about the families. Let's be a little bit more respectful. Until next time, pardon my presence. Peace.